Hello there, and welcome to Dream Past Diaries. I'm truly glad you've made it here. Maybe it's been a long day, or maybe you're the kind of dreamer who prefers to drift off to the sound of quiet thoughts and forgotten mysteries instead of counting sheep. Either way, tonight's story is yours to enjoy. You don't have to do anything now, just rest. Let your thoughts slow, your breath deepen, and your body grow lighter, as if gravity itself has begun to fade away.
In the long, unhurried centuries of the medieval world, when seasons passed more slowly in the minds of those who lived by the soil and daylight, vegetables were not simply food, but quiet companions of everyday life, growing patiently beneath the same skies that watched over kings, peasants, monks, and merchants alike. And it was within this calm agricultural rhythm that certain humble plants slowly became the subject of suspicion, regulation, and eventually quiet exclusion, not through dramatic decrees shouted in town squares, but through gradual murmurs of concern whispered by landowners, church scholars, physicians, and early agricultural authorities who believed that order, predictability, and moral balance were best maintained when even the smallest leaf and root behaved as expected. And so medieval life, especially in farming villages, revolved around repetitive tasks such as loosening soil with simple wooden tools, observing the slow emergence of green shoots, and noting which vegetables thrived reliably and which seemed stubborn, unruly, or associated with undesirable effects like excessive gas, strange dreams, or supposed moral laxity. And as people woke each morning to the same church bells and walked the same narrow paths between fields, they developed deep emotional attachments to certain vegetables that had fed generations, such as onions, cabbages, leeks, and peas, while quietly growing wary of others that appeared to spread too aggressively, resist predictable harvesting, or grow in forms that seemed irregular or unsettling. And in this atmosphere of cautious observation, the idea that agriculture itself needed guidance and control slowly took shape, not in the modern sense of corporations or mass production, but as a medieval instinct to standardize what was grown, eaten, taxed, and tithed. And so vegetables were discussed in monastery gardens with the same seriousness as scripture, their shapes and tastes interpreted as reflections of divine order or disorder. And monks, who spent long hours tending enclosed gardens, recorded which plants were calm and dependable, and which seemed to invite excess or imbalance in the body's humors, leading to slow-moving debates about whether certain vegetables encouraged laziness, lust, melancholy, or digestive unrest. And as these opinions filtered outward into rural communities, farmers began favoring vegetables that aligned with accepted norms, planting them year after year until fields became visually uniform, rows repeating the same shapes like quiet lines of prayer, while more controversial vegetables were quietly neglected, left unplanted, or discouraged through subtle social pressure rather than outright bans. And this created a strange but gentle kind of agricultural censorship, where a vegetable could fade from daily life, not because it was poisonous or dramatic, but because it was considered inconvenient, difficult to store, or symbolically troublesome. And people, valuing stability above novelty, accepted these changes without resistance, continuing their routines of boiling stews, drying roots, and storing produce in cool cellars, while rarely questioning why certain vegetables no longer appeared on the table. And so, over decades, and then centuries, some plants slipped into obscurity, remembered only in marginal notes of herbal manuscripts or half-forgotten folk tales told by elders who recalled their parents growing unusual greens that tasted bitter or smelled strange when cooked. And in these stories, the vegetables were not villains, but quiet anomalies, plants that simply did not fit neatly into the medieval desire for agricultural order. And as population grew and land became more carefully managed, authorities increasingly preferred crops that yielded predictable results, could be taxed reliably, and could survive transport to markets without spoiling too quickly, leaving little room for vegetables that grew unevenly, ripened unpredictably, or required special preparation.
and thus the slow process of agricultural preference turned into something that, in hindsight, resembles a ban, though at the time it felt more like a collective sigh of relief when troublesome plants were no longer part of daily concern. And the medieval farmer, rising at dawn and ending the day at dusk, found comfort in the familiar sight of approved vegetables swaying gently in the breeze, their presence reassuring, their absence of surprise soothing to tired minds. And in this way, agriculture became not just a means of survival, but a method of maintaining emotional calm and social harmony, where even vegetables were expected to behave properly, grow quietly, and nourish without question. And any plant that challenged this silent agreement was slowly, patiently, and almost lovingly removed from the shared memory of daily life, leaving behind fields that looked orderly, meals that tasted familiar, and a society that slept more easily, knowing that even its gardens were under control. As the medieval world continued its slow and steady turning through the years, the quiet relationship between people and their vegetables became even more deeply woven into daily routine. And it was within kitchens, gardens, and monastic refectories that opinions about certain plants solidified into habits that felt ancient even when they were relatively new. For medieval life was built on repetition, and repetition gave comfort. So when a vegetable disrupted that rhythm by cooking unevenly, spoiling too quickly, or producing flavors that lingered unpleasantly in the mouth, it was not met with anger, but with a gentle reluctance that gradually transformed into avoidance. And in this way, certain vegetables began to disappear not from law books, but from memory, as cooks chose safer options that behaved predictably in pots that simmered for hours over low fires, where stews were meant to bubble quietly while families worked, prayed, or rested nearby, and vegetables that required careful timing or special handling were seen as disruptive to this calm domestic flow, particularly in households where fuel was precious and mistakes costly. And medieval cooks, often women working without written recipes, relied on instinct and tradition, passing down knowledge orally, so anything that did not conform easily to inherited methods was quietly set aside. And this practical avoidance was reinforced by medieval medical theory, which explained health through the balance of humors, a concept so deeply ingrained that even farmers with no formal education understood that food should warm or cool the body appropriately depending on season, age, and temperament, and vegetables that were believed to be excessively cold, damp, or stimulating were viewed with suspicion, not because they caused immediate harm, but because they were thought to slowly disturb inner balance, leading to vague discomforts like restless sleep, strange dreams, or sluggish mornings. And these effects, subtle and difficult to prove, were nonetheless taken seriously in a world that valued bodily harmony as a reflection of moral order, and physicians writing in Latin manuscripts often cautioned against overconsumption of certain greens that grew too close to the ground, absorbed excessive moisture, or produced strong odors when cooked. And these warnings, translated imperfectly through sermons or local advice, filtered into everyday decision-making, shaping what people planted and ate. And as monasteries became centers of agricultural experimentation, monks carefully recorded which vegetables produced calm digestion and which caused murmurs of complaint among the brethren. And since monastic life prized stability and mental focus, any food associated with distraction, discomfort, or physical unease was discouraged. And over time, the absence of these vegetables from monastic gardens gave them an aura of impropriety, as if they were unsuitable not just for monks, but for respectable people in general. And villagers, who looked to monasteries as models of order and divine favor, often followed their example without question, preferring vegetables that had received implicit approval through long use. And so the cycle continued, where preference hardened into tradition, and tradition quietly erased alternatives. And markets reflected these changes as well, with stalls offering familiar produce arranged neatly in baskets, their colors muted and reassuring, while rarer vegetables appeared only occasionally, often overlooked by buyers who did not wish to risk wasting precious coins on unfamiliar tastes. And merchants, ever practical, reduced their offerings accordingly, further narrowing the range of vegetables in circulation. And thus what might seem like a ban was in reality a collective leaning towards sameness, a desire to keep life predictable in a world already filled with uncertainty from weather, disease, and politics. And vegetables that once had a place in medieval diets faded gently away, not mourned, not defended, simply replaced by more agreeable options. And as generations passed, people grew up believing that the vegetables they knew were the only ones that ever mattered, unaware that their ancestors had once grown and eaten plants now forgotten. And this forgetting was not violent or sudden, but soft and gradual, like the smoothing of a well-worn path. And it allowed medieval society to maintain a sense of continuity and calm, where each meal resembled the last, each planting season followed familiar patterns, and even the soil itself seemed content to yield the same dependable crops year after year, reinforcing the quiet medieval belief that stability, even at the cost of variety, was a virtue worth preserving.
In the gently unfolding rhythm of medieval rural life, the influence of land, obligation, and quiet authority shaped the daily experience of growing vegetables in ways that were rarely questioned and almost never challenged, because land was not merely a place where food emerged, but a carefully structured system of responsibility that connected farmers to lords, churches, monasteries, and long-established customs that reached back beyond living memory. And within this system, predictability was valued as deeply as nourishment itself, encouraging the cultivation of vegetables that behaved consistently across seasons, and discouraging those that introduced uncertainty or demanded special attention. And so farmers, whose days were already filled with long hours of repetitive physical labor and slow, careful mental calculation, learned to prefer plants that asked little of them beyond routine care, plants whose growth patterns were deeply familiar, whose leaves, stems, and roots behaved in ways that had been observed, named, and quietly memorized across generations, and whose yields could be estimated with calm confidence rather than anxious guesswork. And this preference was reinforced by the emotional comfort that familiarity provided, because growing the same vegetables year after year created a sense of continuity that softened the many hardships of medieval life, allowing people to feel anchored in a world that otherwise changed slowly but relentlessly through unpredictable weather, recurring illness, shifting obligations, and the ever-present awareness of authority. And vegetables that grew irregularly produced unexpected textures, emitted strong smells, or required special preparation, disrupted this comfort, not because they were dangerous or forbidden, but because they demanded attention, explanation, and adaptation, three things that were quietly exhausting in a society where energy was limited and survival uncertain. And over time, these vegetables were not banned loudly or removed suddenly, but quietly abandoned, their absence becoming normal as fields filled with repeating patterns of approved crops, and the landscape itself began to reflect a deep social desire for order, with rows of familiar vegetables stretching calmly toward the horizon, their sameness offering visual reassurance to those who walked among them at dawn or dusk, carrying tools worn smooth by years of use. And this reassurance extended into the administrative aspects of medieval life, where harvests were assessed, recorded, weighed, counted, and sometimes taxed, and vegetables that could be easily measured and instantly recognized fit neatly into these systems, while those that varied too much in size, weight, shape, or growth habit created mild confusion that authorities preferred to avoid, because confusion slowed processes, required discussion, and introduced doubt, and doubt was something medieval systems worked gently but persistently to eliminate. And so the economic logic of obligation reinforced agricultural conformity, making it easier for farmers to comply by growing what was expected, rather than experimenting with vegetables that might complicate their duties or invite questions from officials whose judgments carried consequences. And this conformity was further strengthened by communal norms, as villages functioned through shared practices and quiet mutual observation, where neighbors noticed what each other planted, harvested, cooked, and stored, and deviation from established patterns risked subtle disapproval, whispered comments, or practical difficulty,
encouraging individuals to align their choices with collective habit rather than personal curiosity. And even seed-saving practices reflected this mindset, as families carefully preserved seeds from vegetables that had proven reliable and productive, while neglecting or discarding seeds from less favored plants, gradually narrowing the range of vegetables available for future planting. And this narrowing happened so slowly and gently that no single generation perceived it as loss, and instead people experienced it as stability, believing sincerely that the vegetables they grew were simply the ones that belonged in their world. And this belief was passed down through stories told during long evenings by low fires, routines repeated each season without comment, and unspoken assumptions woven into daily labor, shaping the emotional relationship between people and their food. And meals prepared from familiar vegetables reinforced this sense of order, their mild flavors, soft textures, and predictable effects, encouraging slow, thoughtful eating that fit the medieval ideal of moderation and balance, allowing bodies to remain steady, digestion to remain calm, and minds to remain quiet. And in this way, agriculture became not just a means of survival, but a quiet discipline that trained people to accept limitation as natural and even desirable, teaching them that comfort came not from abundance, novelty, or variety, but from knowing exactly what to expect day after day, season after season. And vegetables that did not align with this discipline faded gently from daily life, disappearing first from fields, then from kitchens, then from markets, and finally from memory itself, leaving behind a simplified but emotionally soothing agricultural landscape that supported the medieval pursuit of calm endurance, repetition, familiarity, and quiet continuity over excess or change. In the quiet, measured life of medieval towns and surrounding villages, the cultivation and consumption of vegetables was influenced not only by fields, landowners, and communal expectations, but also by the intricate rhythms of domestic and monastic life. Because within the walled gardens of monasteries and the small, enclosed plots of urban homes, every plant was observed carefully for its behavior, growth, and utility. And monks and nuns in particular approached these gardens not only as sources of nourishment, but as places of reflection and spiritual discipline, noting how each vegetable affected the body, the mind, and the daily schedule of labor. And vegetables that were known to be too strong in taste, too bitter, or difficult to digest were quietly discouraged because they interfered with long hours of prayer, study, and contemplation, while plants that grew reliably, provided steady yields, and were simple to prepare, were favored for their ability to support both physical health and emotional calm. And this attention to the properties of each plant extended beyond monasteries into town households, where cooks and household managers learned through experience which vegetables would store well in earthen cellars, which could survive slow transport to market without spoilage, and which would please the modest palates of those who could not afford extravagant flavors. And so meals were composed with a careful balance of what was familiar and manageable, creating a domestic landscape that was orderly, predictable, and emotionally reassuring. And in the urban markets, vendors offered vegetables arranged neatly in baskets and barrels, with colors and shapes that conformed to expectations, while rarer or more unpredictable varieties were absent or hidden, both because they were difficult to sell and because the populace had grown accustomed to predictability. And over time, this shared preference for familiar vegetables reinforced social norms as neighbors discussed what they had planted, exchanged seeds of dependable crops, and rarely experimented with unusual plants that might be wasted or viewed as frivolous. And this quiet conservatism also intersected with medical theory, as medieval humoral medicine taught that foods affected the balance of heat, cold, moisture, and dryness in the body, and vegetables that were thought to disturb this balance, for example by being too moist, cold, or stimulating, were avoided, while plants that were calming, neutral, or strengthening were repeatedly planted and consumed. And as knowledge was transmitted orally from parent to child and through practical demonstration rather than through formal texts, these lessons became ingrained in everyday practice, creating generations of people who intuitively knew which vegetables belonged in their lives and which were better left behind. And this repeated observation, consumption, and teaching gradually eliminated a range of plants from daily use, not through official decree, but through quiet preference, gently narrowing the medieval diet while reinforcing a sense of stability and calm. And within households, vegetables were prepared slowly over open hearths, boiled or roasted in large iron cauldrons, often for many hours, allowing their flavors to mellow and their textures to soften. And this slow cooking reinforced the idea that vegetables were not meant to excite, but to soothe, to provide steady nourishment that supported both body and mind. And as children grew up eating these same vegetables in the same ways, they internalized the rhythms of preparation and consumption, seeing them as natural and unchanging. And so the repetition of daily meals, combined with careful selection of plants that behaved predictably, created an emotional environment of reassurance, where the act of planting and the act of eating were meditative and quiet. And even when new seeds arrived from distant regions through trade, they were often met with polite curiosity but little enthusiasm, because unfamiliar plants demanded experimentation, observation, and sometimes care that people were unwilling to invest, and so they seldom entered long-term cultivation, reinforcing the existing hierarchy of vegetables that were considered calm, dependable, and socially acceptable. And in this way, the slow, deliberate rhythms of domestic and monastic life intertwined with market expectations, medical understanding, and social conformity to produce a medieval vegetable landscape that was orderly, repetitive, and deeply comforting, where the disappearance of certain plants was neither noticed nor lamented, and the continuity of familiar.
In the quiet, methodical life of medieval agriculture, the cultivation of vegetables was intertwined not only with physical labor and seasonal cycles, but also with the intricate expectations of social hierarchy, communal custom, and inherited knowledge. Because the fields themselves were never neutral spaces, but reflected centuries of accumulated practice and observation, and every decision about which plant to sow, when to sow it, and how to tend it carried with it subtle implications for family survival, communal standing, and moral propriety. And so peasants, smallholders, and laborers learned through repeated observation, trial, and oral transmission of experience which vegetables could be relied upon, which grew predictably, which could be harvested with a minimum of effort, and which contributed to meals that were calming and sustaining rather than surprising or challenging. And this preference for the familiar was reinforced by both physical and emotional necessity, because life in medieval villages required careful management of energy, time, and resources, and vegetables that demanded special attention, complicated preparation, or unusual storage were gradually avoided, their absence becoming normalized over seasons and years, until fields, gardens, and kitchens reflected a quiet uniformity that was reassuring to those who lived and worked within them. And within the domestic space, vegetables were prepared in ways that echoed the rhythm of the land itself, boiled, roasted, or stewed over slow hearth fires for hours, their textures softened, flavors muted, and nourishment delivered in predictable, gentle increments that supported not only physical strength, but also the meditative calm of daily routine. And children, learning through long observation, repetition, and imitation, internalized these habits, understanding which vegetables were proper to eat, how they were to be prepared, and when they would be available, forming habits and tastes that would endure across lifetimes, so that the disappearance of less favored vegetables was rarely noticed or mourned, and instead, familiarity reinforced a sense of continuity and security, which was highly valued in a world where external threats, illness, and the unpredictability of weather could easily unsettle daily life.
And this continuity was reinforced by the careful storage of seeds, roots, and preserved vegetables, which ensured that year after year the same crops could be planted and consumed. And by observing the successes and failures of each season, families passed down a practical understanding of which vegetables were dependable, reinforcing the slow process of natural selection, not in the Darwinian sense, but in the quiet shaping of a diet and a landscape that favored calm, moderation, and predictability. And as villages, towns, and monasteries collectively reinforced these habits, the emotional and social weight of certain vegetables grew, making their cultivation a reflection not only of survival, but of order, discipline, and communal cohesion. And this social reinforcement ensured that even when new plants arrived from distant regions, or when experimental cultivation was attempted, most people reverted to the vegetables that had been cultivated reliably for generations, because these plants represented comfort, continuity, and a known rhythm of life. And any deviation demanded attention, energy, and explanation, which were precious commodities, and so unfamiliar vegetables were rarely adopted permanently. And over time, the landscape of medieval agriculture became increasingly homogeneous, ordered, and emotionally reassuring, with familiar vegetables occupying the same fields, gardens, and storage spaces year after year, providing a slow, repetitive, and hypnotic structure to life that reinforced the rhythms of work, domesticity, and communal expectation, and allowing medieval people to experience a sense of calm, stability, and continuity in an otherwise uncertain and demanding world, where survival depended not only on the yield of the fields, but on the quiet predictability of what could be planted, tended, harvested, and consumed, and where vegetables themselves became symbols of endurance, moderation, and shared social understanding, fading gently from life only when they failed to meet these exacting but comforting standards, leaving behind a landscape, diet, and emotional life shaped by repetition, careful observation, and the patient rhythms of long, ordinary days.
In the vast and deliberate expanse of medieval rural life, the cultivation and maintenance of vegetables unfolded with a quiet, almost imperceptible rhythm, dictated by the slow passage of seasons, the cycles of planting and harvesting, and the expectations of social, familial, and spiritual obligation. Because every choice made in the fields carried weight not only for immediate survival, but for the continuation of established patterns that had been honed across generations. And so, peasants, tenants, and smallholders learned through long experience which vegetables would produce reliable yields, which could be counted upon to supply nourishment without causing undue labor, and which would align with the predictable cadence of daily routines that defined both village and domestic life. And this preference for the familiar was further reinforced by the communal observation of neighbors, the subtle guidance of elders, and the implicit rules of local custom, so that deviation from standard practices, though rarely punished outright, was quietly discouraged through expectation, polite comment, or practical inconvenience. And over decades, this gentle enforcement shaped the very structure of the vegetable landscape, as plants that required extra care, grew irregularly, or failed to conform to the neat, observable patterns of soil, sunlight, and moisture were gradually abandoned, their disappearance unnoticed because the repetition of familiar crops had become the unremarkable norm, and the visual order of fields, gardens, and storage spaces contributed to an emotional sense of calm, because walking between neat rows of cabbages, beans, onions, and other dependable vegetables reinforced a perception of stability that mirrored the desired stability of life itself. And as harvests were weighed, recorded, and sometimes portioned for lords, the church, or local tithes, the advantage of predictable crops became even clearer, because irregular or demanding vegetables risked error, waste, or delay, while reliable plants integrated seamlessly into the existing system of obligation.
And within homes and kitchens, these same principles guided the preparation of food, as vegetables were boiled, roasted, or stewed slowly over open hearths, their flavors softened, textures evened, and nourishment delivered in a manner that required neither surprise nor intensive attention. And children, learning through repetition and observation, internalized these practices, understanding which plants were proper to cultivate, how they were to be prepared, and when they would appear on the table, forming a lifelong pattern of culinary expectation that reinforced the consistency of domestic and agricultural routines. And even when new seeds or plants arrived through trade or monastic instruction, they were often met with polite curiosity but little sustained interest, because unfamiliar crops required observation, experimentation, and care that many were unwilling or unable to provide. And so the landscape of vegetables in medieval villages and monasteries became increasingly homogeneous, ordered, and emotionally reassuring, with familiar plants occupying the same plots, gardens, and storage spaces year after year, supporting both practical survival and emotional stability. And monasteries contributed to this slow reinforcement of continuity, because monks and nuns, tending their gardens with precision and contemplative attention, selected vegetables that promoted steady digestion, calm mental states, and gentle meditative labor, avoiding those that were bitter, overly pungent, or difficult to prepare. And surrounding communities observing these practices often emulated them, adopting similar plants and techniques, so that the cultivation of vegetables became a subtle instrument of social cohesion, religious reinforcement, and emotional moderation. And over time, the repetition of these tasks, whether in the field, the kitchen, or the garden, created a hypnotic and soothing rhythm that supported both the body and mind, and ensured that the disappearance of less dependable vegetables was experienced not as deprivation, but as the natural order of life.
In the vast and deliberate expanse of medieval rural life, the cultivation and maintenance of vegetables unfolded with a quiet, almost imperceptible rhythm, dictated by the slow passage of seasons, the cycles of planting and harvesting, and the expectations of social, familial, and spiritual obligation. Because every choice made in the fields carried weight not only for immediate survival, but for the continuation of established patterns that had been honed across generations. And so, peasants, tenants, and smallholders learned through long experience which vegetables would produce reliable yields, which could be counted upon to supply nourishment without causing undue labor, and which would align with the predictable cadence of daily routines that defined both village and domestic life. And this preference for the familiar was further reinforced by the communal observation of neighbors, the subtle guidance of elders, and the implicit rules of local custom, so that deviation from standard practices, though rarely punished outright, was quietly discouraged through expectation, polite comment, or practical inconvenience. And over decades, this gentle enforcement shaped the very structure of the vegetable landscape, as plants that required extra care grew irregularly or failed to conform to the neat, observable patterns of soil, sunlight, and moisture were gradually abandoned, their disappearance unnoticed because the repetition of familiar crops had become the unremarkable norm, and the visual order of fields, gardens, and storage spaces contributed to an emotional sense of calm, because walking between neat rows of cabbages, beans, onions, and other dependable vegetables reinforced a perception of stability that mirrored the desired stability of life itself. And as harvests were weighed, recorded, and sometimes portioned for lords, the church, or local tithes, the advantage of predictable crops became even clearer, because irregular or demanding vegetables risked error, waste, or delay, while reliable plants integrated seamlessly into the existing system of obligation. And within homes and kitchens, these same principles guided the preparation of food,
as vegetables were boiled, roasted, or stewed slowly over open hearths, their flavors softened, textures evened, and nourishment delivered in a manner that required neither surprise nor intensive attention. And children, learning through repetition and observation, internalized these practices, understanding which plants were proper to cultivate, how they were to be prepared, and when they would appear on the table, forming a lifelong pattern of culinary expectation that reinforced the consistency of domestic and agricultural routines. And even when new seeds or plants arrived through trade or monastic instruction, they were often met with polite curiosity but little sustained interest, because unfamiliar crops required observation, experimentation, and care that many were unwilling or unable to provide. And so the landscape of vegetables in medieval villages and monasteries became increasingly homogeneous, ordered, and emotionally reassuring, with familiar plants occupying the same plots, gardens, and storage spaces year after year, supporting both practical survival and emotional stability. And monasteries contributed to this slow reinforcement of continuity, because monks and nuns, tending their gardens with precision and contemplative attention, selected vegetables that promoted steady digestion, calm mental states, and gentle meditative labor, avoiding those that were bitter, overly pungent, or difficult to prepare. And surrounding communities observing these practices often emulated them, adopting similar plants and techniques, so that the cultivation of vegetables became a subtle instrument of social cohesion, religious reinforcement, and emotional moderation. And over time, the repetition of these tasks, whether in the field, the kitchen, or the garden, created a hypnotic and soothing rhythm that supported both the body and mind, and ensured that the disappearance of less dependable vegetables was experienced not as deprivation, but as the natural order of life, while the vegetables that remained became emblematic of endurance, stability, and the quiet virtues of moderation and predictability. And the rhythm of planting, tending, harvesting, storing, and consuming vegetables became an invisible but pervasive framework for daily life, embedding itself deeply into the habits, expectations, and emotional consciousness of medieval people, until the landscape, diet, and domestic routine were harmonized into a steady, calming repetition, and vegetables themselves, through their mere presence and familiarity, provided a continuous reassurance of continuity, order, and subtle social alignment that shaped medieval existence more powerfully than any single law, decree, or edict, reinforcing the sense that stability, repetition, and predictable labor were the true measures of well-being and security, and that life, like the cultivated field, could be understood and trusted when it moved at a slow, measured, and repetitive pace, with the familiar rhythm of vegetables marking the passage of time, the unfolding of seasons, and the quiet constancy of human endeavor.